Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is the Marquis de Lafayette. Specifically, we'll be talking about his farewell tour through the United States when he returns 40 something years after the Revolution. And to help us talk about this, we have a very special guest. Founder and president of the Lafayette Trail, Julien is here with us. Julien, thank you so much for coming.
You got it, Jason. Thanks. I'm great to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, most of the people watching this will know who the Marquis de Lafayette was, came, fought the Revolution, went back to France, is the most abbreviated version we could possibly have. Uh, Sometimes overlooked is that, and what is it, 40 years later, he triumphantly returns to the United States. So, talk to me, after some tumultuous years in France, why is it that Lafayette returns to the United States?
Uh, it's a great question to get started on that tour because you have a little bit what's going on in France at the time that Lafayette no longer has this position in the parliament, so he has time. Basically, you would call it today. He has time off, right? He can travel again to the United States. But I think you want to focus here are on more on the American context, the fact that, as you pointed out, the country is coming up on the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the American Revolution. And think about the fact that the founding generation is dying out and that Lafayette is invited by President Monroe and Congress jointly to visit the United States as the last surviving major general of the Continental Army. So there's a new generation of Americans that's taking over the nation basically, and President Monroe and Congress believe that it's in the nation's interest to reinstill those values of the Revolutionary War and make sure that the American experiment keeps going from one generation to another. So Lafayette is the perfect candidate for that. America's oldest ally and a Frenchman himself who fought with the American. Who else could do a better job?
Well, that great question. Probably no one. So, he returns to the United States. What year does he return to the United States?
He returns in the US on August 16th, 1824. He will be in the country for over 13 months and leave on September 8th, 1825. So he comes back to New York City and he's going to enter a 1 year long journey across the entire country, over 5,000 miles across more than 320 cities and towns, carriages, boats, steamboats. So we're talking about a year-long journey where he's going to be received as a hero, as the friend of George Washington, and he's going to bring unity to this country that is being devastated by a very contentious presidential election. And I hope we'll talk about it today.
Absolutely. Now, at this point, do you know how many states there are?
Yeah, there are 24 states at the time. So what I usually tell people is that between now and then, the state of West Virginia was created, and you of course should not forget the District of Columbia in the middle as well. So modern states will be 25 states plus the District of Columbia.
Amazing. So you say he arrives in New York. I'm presuming he's greeted by some kind of fanfare.
Yeah, actually, quite a lot of people actually. All the sources I've looked at, over a third of the entire population of New York came out and welcomed Lafayette. I mean, you gotta imagine, Lafayette. Americans have not heard of Lafayette or from him, to be honest with you, for 40 years, and they don't know what happened to the man. So unless you are one of the founding fathers and you have had the chance to correspond with him over the years, you don't really know what happened of the man. And so it has this gigantic effect when the newspapers of the time start sharing the news around the country that Lafayette is coming back. He's returning to the United States. And the papers around the country are going to coin him the nation's guest. So he's going to be the guest of the United States and he's going to be taken care of just about anywhere from Maine to Louisiana.
So his trip, he arrives in New York, and from my understanding, he heads south down the
No,
coast.
he goes north first. So from New York City, he goes up to Boston, Massachusetts, and spends one day in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on September 1st, 1824. And then from there, he goes south. So going back through Boston and then down through basically New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., where he's going to spend the winter into February of 1825. And then after the celebrations in honor of George Washington at the end of February of that month, for Washington's birthday, he, I mean, celebrations of George Washington, who had passed away in 1799. But Lafayette wanted to honor his, what you see in the letters, his paternal friend, as he calls him. And so he left Washington, D.C., and he started the southern and western part of his trip across the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, upriver, sailing on a boat all the way through St. Louis. And then from there came back through Tennessee, then up to Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and then upstate New York, basically across, going back through Massachusetts and Boston, where he laid the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument on June 17th, 1825. So after that, he will head down again, basically slowly but surely to the nation's capital, a few trips here and there, and he will be out of here in September, early September of 1825.
Amazing. And when he leaves, there's a new president.
Yeah, there's a new president that actually gets elected in the middle, and I'm glad you point that out because that election is very contentious. I mean, like as contentious as it gets, honestly. And there's a lot of bitterness around the country, divisiveness. You see clearly blocs around the country, New England, the West, the Deep South, and the Mid Atlantic, each rooting for its own candidate. Actually, we did a video about that, sort of. We have an episode of Follow the Frenchman at Andrew Jackson's Hermitage to talk about the election of 1824 and what it reveals about the divisiveness in the country. And it will be really the role of Lafayette to cement the nation and bring people together at a time when politics were bringing everybody further apart from each other. So it's a powerful legacy that this man, a Frenchman, Lafayette, was able to be that unifying figure, that stabilizing presence that Americans turn to. And that to me is one of the most important legacies that he has left behind.
Yeah. I often say that, from my perspective, and this could be argued, but the end of the Revolutionary War seems to be Lafayette's tour. Not the Revolutionary War, the American founding, I should say, is Lafayette's
Yeah.
tour because he comes through, like, literally came through my tiny village, and you could see the general and wave goodbye as he left. And he gets here from Monroe, who was an American founder, and leaves for John Quincy Adams, who was literally the son of a founder. I know it's debatable, but that's usually how I throw it out.
Um, I mean, it's a big statement for sure, but I see where you're coming from. I think what I like to say is that the tour of Lafayette, even though it's 40 years later, more than that, it's a lot about the American Revolution. And the way I'm going to intersect with what you just said is that the country, with this election of 1824, the fact that it survives it as one nation really confirms for Americans the feeling that they start to have that there's something special about the United States. Like the American Revolution secured a path to try and make it, but people don't have the history behind them to look back and see if it's going to fly or not. It's something very new. It's a country of laws. It's unlike anything that's been tried in Europe. It's brand new, and people have no idea if it's going to work, even in the 1820s. So I think you can say that Lafayette provided one of the very first official endorsements and a proof, I would say evidence that the American experiment is going to work. And I think that's my feeling at least. It really fueled a new confidence in the nation's institutions. There is something special about this country. The Republican institutions are superior to that of the old continent. Lafayette's visit confirms that. And I think as a result, you'll see a rebirth or a growth of the early themes of American nationalism. So the superiority of the Republican institutions of this country is one, but obviously the fact that that endorsement comes from a noble Frenchman, a hero of the American Revolution, as being goes a long way in this country, and not just in Washington, but everywhere in each of the states in existence and in a lot of communities in those states.
Fascinating. So, uh, let's talk about the trail itself. Are there any are there any events or cities he attends that stick out to you as especially noteworthy? Maybe in the first few months before he takes his winter break.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the large cities were competing with each other to put together the best show in honor of Lafayette. So, up there you have basically two. You have Philadelphia and New York. Depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. I'm not going to get into that, okay? But I will tell you one where I was recently, which is not a large city in any way, shape, or form, but I felt really something special about reading the newspapers there, and that town is in Mississippi. It's called Natchez. It's the only stop that Lafayette made there. And what I like about the papers that I looked at down there is that uh, they they refer to Lafayette as the soldier of liberty, the patriot of the world, a man that basically fought for in America for the American Revolution and secured the constitutional framework that leads decades later to new parts of the country being incorporated in the Union. And in the toasts that are there, I mean, you see stuff like Lafayette says, may this rising star, he's talking about Mississippi, be as brilliant in the American constellation as its river is splendid among the rivers of America. And so, in the toasts, in response to things like that, that Lafayette says down there, people emphasize a lot the chaos of the election of 1824. And then in Mississippi in 1824, people rooted for Andrew Jackson. And a lot of people thought Andrew Jackson would win that election because, let's be honest, he won the popular vote and he won the electoral college tally as well, but he did not win. So in the South specifically, where people voted overwhelmingly to support Jackson's candidacy, it was a surprise. And you look at the toasts and the responses of these men in Natchez, and they show you that, yes, there is chaos in this country. You have seen it, Lafayette, but we have come out as one nation. We have made it. We have survived it. And it's a proof of the resilience of our institutions that anywhere else in the world, that chaos would have led to anarchy, potentially the destruction of that nation. But in America, we can withhold that. We can sustain that pressure, and we can get through it together. And that is typically American. So that goes all into the topic of the American institutions and how unique they are. So I was not expecting to find such rich documentation in the papers of Natchez, Mississippi at the time, but I did. And it's fascinating to look at it. We got a great event there a few days ago. We got great coverage in national news all over the country. And we're going to have a video about Follow the Frenchman in Natchez in just a few weeks. You're going to be blown away. It should be great.
I'm sure I will. I've been blown away by all your videos so far. So, are there any other stops along the way that are interest you? I do want to talk about the Bunker Hill Monument, but is there any other noteworthy stops before we get there?
Well, I mean, there are tons of sure noteworthy stops. I mean, you talk about the American Revolution. I mean, obviously the visit to Yorktown around October 18th, 19th, 1824. The College of William and Mary visit there on the 21st of October, 1824. What else? You have so many sites that have a connection with the Revolutionary War for Lafayette, where he served. So when you look at the documents describing what he did when he went back there, it's absolutely fascinating to me to see how even 50 years later people remember and they use the visit of Lafayette to again reinstill that patriotic feeling. Another point I would think, another point I would make is that I think something special is to be said about when Lafayette traveled to the land that used to be part of New France, right? So remember New France when the French had a colonial project in North America. If you think about it, at its highest and at its best moment, New France was 4 times as big as the 13 colonies. And yet the French managed to lose. They had control of the St. Lawrence River, they had control of the Mississippi River. So it was a huge deal. And you got to think about the point that I'm making here that all of a sudden, after the war of the French and Indian War, the French are gone from North America. But the decades that they spent there, what happens to that history? Does it go away? Or even 50 years later, after the American Revolution, and all the way through the 1820s, can you see any marks, any evidence of the fact that parts of this country used to be French? And so I had great pleasure in looking at the data and trying to see if people made any mention of their French connection in states like Mississippi or parts of Alabama or St. Louis, Missouri, right? All these states, And to me, it was interesting to look at that from that angle because it's not just a site, but it's really an entire land that used to be French. And I had an interest in seeing how well or bad they were incorporated in the American family after Louisiana Purchase. And so the way they received Lafayette in 1824 really informs that to me. I like that.
Fascinating. So, as you said, we could stop at every town and city along the way, but you mentioned that he goes to Boston to help dedicate the Bunker Hill Monument. Could you
Right.
speak to that event a little bit?
Yeah, it's a very significant event in the tour because he actually went there, that's true, on June 17th, 1825, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, one of the very first battles in the American Revolution. But he also went there in August of 1824, not even 3 weeks after he came back. And I want to talk to you about that first because it was the end of August. He went to see the works there or the project of the Bunker Hill Monument Association, and they invited him. They said, "Would you like to come back next year to lay the cornerstone?" And he made that commitment. He said, "Yes, I will." And because of that commitment, or anywhere else in the country when Lafayette travels, you will see very often that he declines invitations because the itinerary that was laid out and patterned after the fact that he had to be back in Boston by June 17th. Now, I'm not breaking any news here, okay? There is no planes at the time. If you want to be back to Boston and you are in April in Mississippi, you better hurry. So when you are invited left and right by everybody, you got to decline a lot of them. That's why actually the itinerary was the way it was because it was very often the most straightforward path through a land in order to make it to the next state so that you can check all the marks and say, I've been to every state, and at the same time be back in time on June 17th. So you see that very clearly when he sails up the Mississippi River. That's like the fastest way up from New Orleans is to sail up that river. And then there was a plan to go through Illinois in Vandalia, but that changed entirely because of the lack of time. So instead, he ended up sailing up the Ohio River. And so you see in his itinerary, basically, you see the need to be back in Bunker Hill and how it shapes the entire journey, especially throughout the South and the West.
Yeah. Well, up here in upstate New York, I live in one of the towns he ran through very quickly.
Which one?
Marcellus, New York. Although
That's right. He
we
came
have
here.
had a marker here since well before I moved to the area, so we got a head start on you up here.
That's right. Well, we're catching up. I've got some things going on in the Finger Lakes region, and I'm sure you'll hear from us again in the few months coming.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely let me know. I'll take a short jaunt out there to join you for sure.
Right.
Now I understand he took some dirt from Bunker Hill to.
Yeah, that's kind of. I mean, I don't like that story too much because I can never substantiate it fully. Like, there's a great author that I like in France, Chateaubriand, that I grew up reading about in French literature class, and he has a very famous book which he published later on after Lafayette's time. But basically, Chateaubriand opposed Lafayette for most of his life, and when Lafayette died in 1834. He finally praised Lafayette posthumously, basically, but he did. And in that tribute to Lafayette, he did mention that story about Bunker Hill soil being brought back to France and spilled over his grave by his son, George Washington. The problem is that Chateaubriand himself writes that that story is not true. It is inaccurate. So I have issues with that story. I don't know if I can fully substantiate it. It's a great story, but I'm still looking for more data.
Hey, we like busting myths here. I appreciate that. I always found it curious anyway, because Lafayette didn't come until well after Bunker Hill, and there was not a whole lot of fighting in Massachusetts. I understand he went to meet the French in Rhode Island, but could never figure out why that would be the battlefield he would choose.
Because, as I said, the tour of the United States by Lafayette in 1825 is about the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the American Revolution,
Oh,
and laying the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument was on June 17th, 1825. And for Lafayette, it was symbolically a connection with the soil of the American Revolution. So it makes sense that they would have picked it. I just don't know about the veracity of the story fully. That's all.
nope. Fair enough. As I said, I was always questioning it myself. Um, so let me ask you, what in particular about Lafayette is it that made you decide? How did you find your way to the trail? Um,
Well, I have always thought that France and the US have a unique connection. Very often people call France America's oldest ally. And I mean, there's a couple of silly jokes here and there. But if you look at history, you see that uniqueness of our friendship. And I just think that Lafayette is not like any other icons of that friendship. Let me give you an example. Why is Lafayette so popular in America and not other French officers like de Grasse or Rochambeau? I'm not saying they're not popular. I'm just saying they're nowhere as popular as Lafayette. And to me, the reason for that is that these two officers that I just named were career, basically military people, and they followed orders. And as far as Lafayette is concerned, we're talking about a man that at 19 years old made the personal decision to pour his own money. Not only that, but he served with the Americans. He served with the Continental Army. And the second thing that I think is unique about Lafayette is that he returned in 1825 as the last surviving major general, which nobody else did, to be honest. And I think there's something personal. Like Lafayette expressed a personal faith in this country's ability to be a beacon of hope for the world. He was absolutely convinced that the institutions of the United States were far superior than that of Europe, and that having success in this country, getting rid of slavery, all that stuff, would eventually benefit natural individual rights and their protection around the world, all over, not just in the US and in Europe, but all over. So he really believed that it was in the not in just in the national interest, but it was in mankind's interests to see the American cause succeed. I think he put this faith out there for Americans to see, and I think that Americans today reward him for that faith that he placed in their country even before independence was achieved.
yeah, it's true. It's true. You remembered in an odd. I mean, I live by Lafayette and Fayetteville within 20 minutes of me.
And I bet they probably were named after him in the right after the tour of 1825, because that's when the national consciousness welcomed Lafayette. He entered the national memory there as a patriotic icon, and I think the tour is mostly responsible for that. I really believe it.
I absolutely agree. So, how many markers have you guys erected at this point?
We have approved about 40 with our partner, the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. We have a few in New York as well that we are partnering with the New York Daughters of the American Revolution to get them up. We have about 40 around the country. I do recommend you go check out our map on our Lafayette Trail website, lafayettetrail.org. There's a map of the markers installed. I update it every single time there's a new marker going up. So none of them have been installed, but we have 40 approved. I would think you have 20, 25 that are up so far. We have a few coming up soon, like we have one soon at the House of President James Madison in Virginia. We're going to have one in a few weeks. We have one at Niagara Falls. It's a big deal. It talks about Lafayette, the abolitionist, right in front of the American Falls for millions of people to see every year. So we are committed to having up to 175 of these markers between now and 2024, 2025, when the 200th anniversary of Lafayette's tour comes up. So it's a big task. There's no question about it, but we're picking up. And we are enjoying a lot of national coverage as of late, and I don't see any reason why it would change anytime soon. I think put the work out there and see what happens.
Well, Julien, congratulations on all the success. Thank you for all the hard work. And if next time you have anything to talk about Lafayette, please feel free to come back and chit chat with us again.
Would be great. I would love to do that. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Founder fans, again, that's Julien Ishay, I got it, and the link is in the description below for everything we were just talking about. He's doing amazing work keeping the Lafayette Trail alive. I really appreciate it. I know you do too. Make sure you hit like and subscribe for a new founder 7 days a week, and I'll be back with that founder for you tomorrow. Nope, wrong button. Well, I'll be back tomorrow. Don't worry.